I was always interested in drawing, so on as a child or the growing boy, and so on. So I did a lot of drawings for different things. In fact, by the time I was around 20 years old, something like that, I had quite a design portfolio of different things. And I'd already, before that, I started working for United Advertising Corporation, New Jersey. And so I was designing billboards, actually.
Oh.
And then from billboards, I got into the neon because they were the first to get the neon contract, on a commercial basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so then from that, in 1932, I decided to go across the country to San Diego because some folks that lived next door went out there to retire. And when I got out there, I said, hell, I'm not going back to the big city in New York or, or New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey. And so with that, why, I had a standing, I won some poster contests. In fact, I entered first or second prize almost every one I entered. So I could have had an art director position on Madison Avenue, and with J. Waller Thompson, actually. They're still a big agency in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And but even at a $200 a week salary in those days would have been fabulous. When I got to San Diego, I said, to hell with all that stuff, and decided to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just coincident that San Diego Neon Sign Company had opened their doors, and I stepped in, and I never heard of anybody designing a neon sign before. And so with that, I started, using neon in other ways, more inventive ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I used it for all kinds of purposes: indirect lighting in buildings, outside of buildings, direct lighting inside instead of the old incandescent lights of stores, and using it on marquees, where they stick out over the sidewalk, and indirect signs, and you name it. I was doing about everything you could do with a light. And I designed the Ford Rotunda building for the architects in 1934, about 30, because the San Diego International Fair opened in 35, 36. And they came up with some drawings, and they wanted a round circular rotunda building, they said.
Mm-hmm.
Going to call it the Ford Rotunda building. It was a Ford venture in Balboa Park for this international fair. And so I told them, I said, well, what you're coming up with, they wanted to make a glass building and put vertical neon behind it. I said, you couldn't afford it. I said, you couldn't do it in the time. And I said, besides, it won't work. So I said, other than that, why? I think you better let me just work on it. So I came up with a design where I took the round building, but instead of making it perfectly round, I did inverted shallow parabolas. They're like inverted things. So the light in the center of the parabola is the same as it is the edge. And then that makes like scallops, like around a circle.
Mm-hmm.
And then I put a neon tube down each one.
That sounds
Yes, it was a 15 millimeter tube. Now we've got special transformers made of 100 milliamp transformers. And then put cap strips over the top that are metal, so the light would light this curve, so it wouldn't look bright at the edge. And actually the curves were just white stucco. See? Mm-hmm. But when you got back from it, say even coming down to the Oregon Pavilion, down to where the building was, it looked like the light was coming through. It was an illusionary effect. Well, I've used neon because it's a very efficient source. So you get a lot of light. In fact, and also the tubes burn for a long while. I've had, I went back to California 20 and more years later, and the same tubes were burning still. In Lakeside Park, the same thing. I mean, just years later. Where, how long does your fluorescent light lamp? It lasts very well, more so than incandescent. But when you get neon, it goes on and on and on. If it's made right. I mean, if you have, you know, of course, there's different rare air gases they put in neon. Neon is a red color light, but there's also argon, krypton, helium, and I used argon, krypton as an example, and then the Germans came out with some phosphor, and then I know that that way would convert the phosphor on the inlining of the neon tube, glass tube, would then convert it over to more visible light. So it's taking the ultraviolet light, converting it more to visible light. So it's increasing the amount of light output, see, by encompassing more of the total light spectrum. See.
Did the Cooper Foundation contact you about designing the Cooper Theater here in Denver?
Yeah, actually, well, it came through someone who was in the Riders of the Rockies, or the Horsemen or something, and he had some connections, and he knew my other work, and so he got in touch with me. And actually, where the Cinerama Theater was in Denver, over here on Colorado Boulevard, well, I had designed a Henritzi's building, which is a very interesting kind of restaurant that had all natural wood and so on. And so we had like an indoor I had an indoor court with like a wave of plastic over the top. So when you were inside, you felt like you were outside, see? And then I also had a waterfall in the corner and all natural setting. And that was called Henritzi's Restaurant. And Barbara has some stuff on that.
Is that still in existence today?
Oh no, because that was torn down to make way for the Cooper Theater. And so then I did the Cooper Theater. So that was the progression. And now, of course, it's torn down, and there's Barnes & Noble put kind of a horrible-looking, square-looking thing in there. It doesn't look like much. On the site, it's not much appeal to it, yeah. Well, of course, that's happened with so much of my work, because it was commercial. You do a restaurant, you know, how long does the party still have that restaurant running after 10 years? So what happens? It gets torn down. Or for that matter, retail stores, how many of them keep going in the same spot for years without expanding or popping or doing something? I did so many retail stores. So in the commercial field was most of my work. But I'm known nationally and internationally for my solar work, you know. I don't know, from way back, even I was going to the Nerk School of Fine Industrial Arts, and I had some architecture there, and I came up with a design back in, that would be back in sometime in the 1930s there, I don't know, anyway. And it just seemed to me logical to have they wanted a classroom building idea, you know, sort of a project. And so I thought of this project being round, floating on a pool of water so that it could rotate. And then you have an aperture at the top so they could turn it. And then also a round classroom I felt was better because it brought the class more into the instructor than the flat. See, there again, it pulls people in, see. And so this was just never executed, but it was just the idea. And then I had like a bridge and a little deck coming around so you get to the door to get in the classroom, of course. And that was another deal there, see, like that, where you could come in and then like you can get the light where you want it, and even the heater. In other words, it was working with the sun essentially. Sure. Yeah.
I get the feeling sometimes you prefer round-shaped buildings to square-shaped.
No, not at all. Actually, it depends on the climate and all this too. Of course, a round-shaped building for the volume inside loses the least energy because you have insulation in a circle, you've got the least exposed wall for the amount of volume inside. And the square building is about next. But somehow, like, if you're really getting the benefit of solar more, like in a good climate like this for it, if it's more slightly east-west and less north-south, why, you get better chance to capture, just like with this research facility up here, it captures the sun. I've got it. This is essentially would be a greenhouse. I use it for a solar test deck out here. And down below, there's a greenhouse, and one for each apartment down below. They use them for greenhouse or not, whether they want to or not. But at least that way, they're designed to capture the sun. And then this is being concrete, heats the wall, and by thermal lag, it heats the building, so it heats the inside in the winter.
Mm-hmm. How many different solar homes have you designed?
Oh gosh, I don't know. A lot of them, yeah, all around. Yeah, I don't know. Of course, in total projects, mostly commercial and solar and residential, it goes into the hundreds. You know, I don't know. Never counted them.
You know, this country, we have such a tendency to waste things.
Well, that's it. Most everything we're doing is wrong. So, of course, the biggest obnoxious thing is actually earth energies from the petroleum family coming out, coal or you know, anything like that, and that we drive our cars around with oil and gasoline, petroleum, or diesel, as the case may be. And to me, it never made sense. And I even worked on, because I have a machine design background too, so I even worked on the concept of a car that would use hydrogen, and then by release of temperature, release the hydrogen, so you could run the car on that. See, but now they're getting around to that. But that was many years ago. So it made more sense to me too. And then of course it would be, from that it would be electric to the wheels and all, and so you'd have zero pollution from it, zero, nothing. And they're getting there, but they talk about some years yet. So everything is behind the times in what we're doing. I mean, what we can do, actually, I look at petro energies as our enemy. They're really our enemy. Instead of push credium to his bosom or something, like, that doesn't make any sense.
So, with regards to solar homes, do you think they'll ever become common?
Well, they were getting that way more so in through the late 1970s. Solar was more hot, and then I had more things in the magazines. You know, I mean, my work was in even some publications, China, Japan, even Europe. So the thing is that it was covering these different areas. You know, like more. I mean, it was more in the flow, even internationally. But then somehow, I don't know, after Ronald Reagan got in, that kind of pulled the rug from under the whole thing. And somehow then that, and it didn't seem like, Carter was all for solar. In fact, I had dinner with him out here one time. He came and talked about solar. He was for it. But no other president was any more than Bush is. So, it isn't only solar, it's a matter of total site prevailing energies, of the earth temperatures, of the climatology of the site, the shape and form of it, its ground levels, what it's pitching towards or what it's doing, and how we can conserve and not use so much petro energy to do construction work, because that's really worse, that pollutes the whole neighborhood.
So how do you feel about outliving some of the buildings you designed, like the Indian Hills?
Well, it's sort of like this says the death of the Indian Hills Theater. Well, if I took a list, I've got a list here, I don't know, I don't have all of this is just a partial list. And I go down and I could just say, you know, I would say the majority, maybe 75% of the commercial things are gone. They're shot.
And how do you visit?
So I have, yeah, it bothers me, particularly the Cooper. I mean, a project like that I thought was outstanding and different kind of thing. It's very appealing to me, and you know, I'm quite enthralled a bit about the idea if somebody might want to go out and rebuild it back. But I hope it works out. I don't know. It's well, you find a site, you know, whether it would be in that. You can't get that site back, I suppose. That's gone, you know.
Right.
So it'd have to be some other location. Getting the land, and building the theater. And I say today, you have to look at the young audience, and if it's feasible, I'm very realistic, And some are pretty good and some aren't, but I don't know. I get these architectural magazines, and I'm never entranced by most of it, So I don't know. Of course, I think that people are more young that go to the theater today than years ago too. They're more of a young crowd, and so they can stand more noise. They can stand more of this. They probably even want the noise,
Mm-hmm.
And just like in TV, you can hardly listen to the darn thing anymore, because it gets so loud. You think you burst somebody's eardrums off, with the stuff. It's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I think too, as I say, you design for always in commercial for the potential of the kind of people, and today it used to be more demographics, that how much money you had in your pocket with the people who come, or it's psychographics is more how people come, or how it affects their minds. See what I mean? And of course, you have to read the mind of your customers.
Sure.
How they're related and what they're going to do. Just like in a store, and in our culture, too, people have certain habits. They go to the right when they go drive, and they go to the right when they walk along a sidewalk generally, and they go to the right when they go into the building, and everything's to the right. And then other cultures where people go to the left. So it's a matter of a culturalization. So it's a matter of the culture as well as the environment that people are brought up in, and they get used to it as kids, and then they grow up and
Mm-hmm.
that gets stuck into them, so that's something that they behave in that way. So we have to look at our culture and see what it's doing.